The first technique we're going to start off with is pressure, light, medium, and hard. Now, one of the most important things is how you hold your pencil. A lot of people hold it close to the tip, which is good for when you're drawing dark, but really you want to hold it farther away. And you also want to make sure that you're not moving your arm, but you're actually just moving your hand like you were a crab and you were pinching your claws. This will give you more control so that you can stay inside the lines. So notice how I'm only moving my hand back and forth, and I'm just very lightly touching the paper. And I'm moving my way around the circle. And when you get closer to the edge, you can do smaller strokes back and forth. And when you're covering the area in the middle, you can do bigger strokes. And you can sort of move your hand back and forth more. But notice that my arm isn't moving at all, and it's staying fairly still. Next, we're going to move on to medium pressure. So you're going to push a little bit harder on your paper. And same thing, you're going to hold your pencil a little bit farther back from the tip. So you're kind of holding it in the middle of your pencil. You want to make sure not to do smaller strokes layered on top of each other. You want to try to keep it as even as possible. So really try to keep the same pressure throughout the whole circle. And if you need to add in some little spots, make sure that they don't overlap with other pieces, because when things overlap, you'll start to get darker spaces. Next, we're going to move on to hard pressure. So you can notice that I move my hand closer to the tip of the pencil now, and I'm holding it with sort of a firmer grasp, and I'm really pushing down. You can see the color is much more vibrant, and there's less white spaces and less texture when you press down hard. You might need to go over this a couple of times and really get it as vibrant as you can. When you're doing a hard pressure, you really shouldn't see many white gaps. Also, depending on what type of table you're using, like for instance, I'm using a wooden table, you might see some of that texture come through on the paper. That's okay, but if you don't like it, you can always put a piece of like a clipboard underneath or some other type of flat, smooth surface. Once you filled that all in, now we're going to move on to the other techniques: hatch, crosshatch, and circles. So hatching just simply means making straight lines, parallel straight lines in the same direction. Now, the closer your lines are together, the darker it will appear. The farther apart your lines are, which means more white showing through from the paper, will appear to be lighter. So it's up to you how dark or how light you want to make this. I'm using about a medium pressure with this, and I'm filling in some of those gaps with straight lines. And it's really important here not to move your arm and to just keep it in one direction. With cross-hatching, it's the same thing, but you're going to make crosses, sort of like a tic-tac-toe board. So I'm going to make parallel straight lines going all the way down, and then I'm going to go across the other way so that I have this sort of screen-looking appearance. And it's the same thing. If you have lines closer together, like I do here in the middle, as opposed to on the outside, it will look darker when the lines are closer together, and it will appear lighter when they are farther apart. You might want to take some practice experimenting with this and also just practicing getting your lines straight. It can take some time to get the hang of making your lines straight. Now with circles, which is also another fancy term for it, is called scumbling. You're going to make small circles over and over and over again. And as the same thing with hatching and cross-hatching, the smaller and tighter the circles, the darker it will appear, like it does on the left, and the wider, bigger circles will appear lighter because more white is showing through. So you can see here on the bottom, I'm doing really tight circles to make it appear darker. Now I'm just going to go over the whole thing so that it appears to be even. This is really great when you're trying to create texture in a piece. Next, we're going to talk about layering and blending colors, and we're going to create a tint using white. So adding white to anything creates a tint or a lighter color. So I'm using my magenta colored, and I'm going to start from the corner and work my way out to the other corner of the square. And I'm just using a medium pressure And I'm trying to keep it as even as possible. And it's okay if you go outside the lines a little bit. You can notice now that I'm sort of doing a crosshatch layering by now going in an opposite direction. This is the best way to layer. If it's difficult for you to have your hand in that position, you can also move your paper. So rotate your paper instead of rotating your hand. I just have mine taped down for the purposes of this video. I'm also starting to make it a little bit darker at the top, like a gradient, and then I'm fading it a little bit down so that it gets lighter. So I'm starting off with a slightly harder pressure up at the top, medium pressure in the middle, and then as I get to the bottom, I'm very lightly touching the paper for a light pressure. Now I'm going to take my white pencil and I'm going to blend that together. You'll notice as I do this that it will not only lighten it, but it will also fill in those gaps that's created from the texture of the paper and the texture of the surface underneath. So now what was magenta is looking more of a tint of a magenta, which is more of a pink color. And white is really great because it can help you blend. And I'm going to go back in here with a magenta just to sort of even it out. Because sometimes when you use white, it can muddy all the colors and make it sort of one tone, and I wanted to darken it a little. The issue is with white, once you've added the white, it's really hard to erase what you've done. So make sure that you've done all your layering first and then go in with your white pencil. Notice the difference between the medium pressure and then the tint, how the texture of the paper has changed once I added the white. Now we're going to make a shade using black. Same thing, I'm going to create an even layer with my colored pencil, going back and forth layering in different directions. Notice I'm doing small strokes. I'm just barely moving my hand and my wrist, not moving my arm. I'm going diagonally, I'm going up and down, side to side with my pencil so that all of those little gaps are filled in. Notice too that I'm going from corner to corner. So I'm trying to cover the whole area of the square at once. You don't want to fill in little areas at one time because it will overlap funny, and then you'll get different tones in different areas of the square. Now, what's different about the black is the black will really come out dark, so go really light with your pressure here. As opposed to when I used the white colored pencil for the tint, I really used a lot of pressure for that. So make sure you go really light because it's really hard to erase once you've already put the black down. So adding the black or the shade should be your final step. And you can layer lightly in different directions until you get your desired shade. Now we're going to layer two colors on top of each other. I've chosen this blue and sticking with my magenta. So I'm doing the same thing again, covering the whole surface back and forth. I'm holding my pencil in the middle. Now obviously this gets a little harder if you sharpened your pencil a couple of times, but right now I'm holding it in the middle so I can get a nice medium pressure. And once again, if you go outside the lines a little bit, that's okay. You can always clean it up with an eraser after. But make sure to try your best to stay inside the lines because colored pencil is a little bit more difficult to erase than regular pencil. Now that I have an even layer, I'm going to go in with the blue very lightly. And you can see it starting to create this really nice bluish purple. So I started from one corner in the bottom left and worked up to the top right, and then I switched and did the opposite way. This will create the most even layering for your drawing. I'm going to go back in with a little bit magenta because I felt like it was maybe getting a little bit too blue, and I wanted to bring out that magenta a little bit more. Next, we're going to try a blending pencil. I'm going to use my blue pencil and a colorless blender. So a colorless blender is basically just a pencil, but it has no color on it. The tip looks sort of white, but you'll notice that it says colorless and the pencil looks like a regular wooden pencil. So I'm going to do an even layer of the blue. Doing some smaller strokes around the edge so that I can fill in those gaps by the outlines. Now I'm going to take my colorless blender. I'm going to start from one corner and I'm going to shade upwards. Now you can notice that it's starting to blend the colors together. We don't have that texture of the paper anymore. And it doesn't lighten the color, it actually makes it more vibrant, which is really awesome. So it just brings out the color a little bit more. I'm only going to do half so you can see the difference between each side. You don't have to use a colorless blender all the time. Sometimes texture in a colored pencil looks nice and is what the effect you're looking for. Other times, a colorless blender can be really helpful because it smooths out a drawing. So it just depends on what you're working on. Look at the difference now between the texture of the two colors layered together and the blending pencil. I'm going to put a little bit on top of the two colors so you can see what happens there. Now you can really see how vibrant that purple is. And again, just like the white, once you've used the colorless blender, it's hard to take it out. So really make sure that this is the last step that you're doing, because once you put the colorless blender down, it makes it really difficult to erase afterwards. Here I'm adding it to the shade as well, so you can see the difference between with the colorless blender and without. Now we're going to do some blending with some gradients from light to dark, and we're going to meet in the middle. So I'm going to start with this light blue that I was using before and a darker blue. I'm going to start from one end and I'm going to use a hard pressure here, as hard as I can possibly go. And then as I start to move down, I'm going to slowly start to use a medium pressure. If you notice I'm a little bit messy on the edges, that's okay. We'll go back in and clean it up later. So I'm still using a medium pressure here as I work my way into the middle. As you start to get to the middle of the box, you're going to want to switch to a light pressure. Excuse the green dot that's on the screen. I think I accidentally did something with my recording device and I can't figure out how to get it out. I'm bringing all the color to almost to the other side. Now I'm just going to go in and go at a different angle so I can fill in some of those gaps and make it nice and even. Remember, this is cross-hatching, but in this case, I'm not making specific lines. I'm just shading back and forth. I'm still using a light medium pressure here in the middle and bringing it all the way over to the dark side. Now I'm going to take my dark blue pencil and I'm going to do the same thing but in the opposite direction. I'm going to start with a hard pressure. The pressure should be so hard that you don't see any of the white of the paper when you first start. And then you can slowly start to decrease your pressure so that you're using medium pressure. And then as you get to the middle, you're going to start to lighten your pressure a little bit more. And you're just going right on top of that lighter blue. Make sure to sharpen your pencils often, especially when you're doing light pressure. It makes it much easier. When you have a dull pencil, it makes it difficult to do any of the light pressure, especially after you've just done a lot of hard pressure. And same thing with the light blue. I'm going to bring the light pressure in dark blue all the way over, almost to the end. And here I'm hardly touching the paper. Now I'm going to go back in and go in a different direction to try to even it out a bit. Here I'm just doing at the same light to medium pressure over the whole thing so that I can even it out. And once again, I'm going outside the lines. That's totally fine. I'll clean it up with an eraser later. This is just for practicing purposes. Okay, now I'm going to use the colorless blender, but you can also use white to do some blending here. And I'm just going to go over the whole thing with a medium pressure. Okay, now we're going to do from cool color to warm color. I'm going to use the same blue, and I'm going to use a red as well. So I'm going to start with the blue on the cool side, and I'm going to do the same thing I did before, where I'm going to start off with a hard pressure. In this instance, I'm going to move this up because there is a part of my table with a crack in it, which was giving me some weird line underneath. So make sure you have a clean surface underneath. So I'm going to start with a hard pressure, as hard as I can go, and then I'm going to slowly release to a medium pressure. Now I'm going to use my red pencil and I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side, starting with a hard pressure. But make sure to sharpen your pencil if you need to. Now I'm going to do the same thing as I did on the top gradient. However, you'll notice that because it's sort of an orange reddish pencil, it will mix with the blue and create sort of a muddied look because orange and blue are sort of opposites on the color spectrum. So I might get sort of a brownish look, and that's okay, but it's just not going to look as clean or as neat as, say, using a light and a dark of the same color. Now I'm going to use my colorless blending tool to blend some of it. And again, you can also use white for this, but just remember that white will lighten everything. So you can see that it makes everything much more vibrant, and especially where the color overlaps, it makes it a much darker brownish kind of color. I'm going to try white on the other side just so you can see what that looks like. Normally you would just choose one, either the colorless blender or the white, and you do it throughout the whole thing. But for this purpose, I just want you to see the difference between what white can do and what colorless blending pencils can do. Now I'm going to show you how to shade using a light source. So here's our sun in the upper right hand corner, and it is pointing down into the top right of the cube. So this side is going to be in shadow, and this side is also going to be in shadow. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is make sure you have a sharpened pencil, and we're going to start on the top part, and I'm going to work my way from the left side, which is going to be slightly darker because it is farther away from the light source, and I'm going to slowly and very lightly make my way towards the lightest part near the sun. I'm going to just very lightly mark out a line, you might not be able to see it, so that I know sort of where to stop, because I want that corner to be white, and that's called a highlight. And I'm going to do most of the layering in the upper left-hand corner. Notice that I'm using a light pressure the whole time. I just keep layering it on top of each other every single time. I'm not getting any medium or hard pressure in here. I'm just simply using the same light pressure and switching the direction that I'm coloring. Now I'm going to do this side, and I'm going to start from the bottom where it's going to be the darkest because it is the farthest away from the light source. So I'm going to use still only a medium pressure here. I'm not going to start out hard because I want to layer it on top of each other. Remember that you can always add on to your colored pencil to make something darker, but it is harder to take something away and make it lighter, because once colored pencil is down, it doesn't erase that well. So always start light and build up slowly until you get the desired darkness or lightness that you want. So I'm doing this from the corner because the sun is in the corner. If the sun was directly above the cube, then I would make the bottom of the cube darkest. But in this case, I'm coming from the corner because our sun is off to an angle. I'm going to rotate my paper slightly so I can change my direction a little bit easier and make it easier on my hand. Now you can see here that I've put it in a little bit too dark and I made a mistake, so I'm going to use my eraser to lift some of that color out. So I'm just using a regular pencil plastic eraser, but you can also use a kneaded eraser or you can use a rubber eraser, and I'm just lightly back and forth going back to erase it. I don't want to take the color fully out, so I'm just doing a little bit, and then I'm going to go back in with my colored pencil very, very lightly to put some of that color back in. Next, I'm going to use my white pencil to do some blending, but make sure that you wipe off or make sure that there's no color from your previous drawing on the white, because it will transfer, which is what I just did. So you can always use a scrap piece of paper or a wet paper towel to wipe off some of that color. Unfortunately, I already got some on my paper, so it's going to look a little orange in that area. It shouldn't look like that, but now you can see what not to do. And there you have it, your colored pencil blending techniques. I hope this is helpful, and thanks for watching.